Lesson 12, Genesis Class Overview.
The main point of this website is to determine what is truth. And in order to determine what is truth, you need to look at absolute reality. Try to find out the absolute reality in all circumstances. And sometimes that's difficult. Even when you're looking at absolute reality from relative positions, I'm going to show you 3 different scenarios where you have to decide what is absolute reality versus the relative reality. Now, in the beginning of my physics class, I talked about the difference between indoctrination and deductive teaching and learning. What we have the tendency to do is indoctrinate our youth, our students, into one way of thinking. But if you really want to get to the truth, if you really want to get to absolute reality, you need to try to see if you can see it from 2 different perspectives. And that's the point of this website, is to give you an alternative data so that you can determine what is truth. So I start this with determining what is the difference between absolute reality, which is the truth, absolute reality versus relative reality. And the first thing I did was in this first physics class, at the end of the class, I used a thought experiment which goes something like this. We have the International Space Station, and on the International Space Station is weightless, so people that are in this chamber can't tell what's up and what's down. And in this chamber we have Niels Bohr and Einstein head to head, as illustrated. Now, in my physics class I used an electron, but I'm going to simplify it by just saying an arrow. So there's an arrow that appears, and they're both asked, which way is the arrow pointing? Well, Einstein, from his perspective, says that the arrow is pointing up. However, Niels Bohr, from his perspective, say that the arrow is pointing down. So which one is right? Is it up or down? Well, it's obvious that they're both correct. They are both, neither one are lying, neither one are trying to be deceptive. They both are viewing it and expressing it from their own perspective. So that's why we can be somewhat dogmatic, because we are true, we're not being deceitful. But at the same time, we need to be respectful of the other person's position in this particular scenario. So that's what makes this understanding of absolute reality and relative reality somewhat difficult, because in this one we say that they are both correct. In the last lesson we talked about a table and a rod, and the table was 7 rods long. 2 years later it was 14 rods long. That's the absolute. It was 7 rods long, and 2 years later is 14 rods long. That's the absolute. 2 people look at that same data, and one says, well, the table doubled in size. That would make it 14 rods long. The other one says, no, the rod shrunk in half. That would make it also 14 rods long. Which one is correct? Well, one might be correct and the other one wrong, or vice versa. Or it could be a combination of the two. Perhaps the table grew some and the rod shrunk some to make it 14 rods long. We don't know. So that's where I come in with this seed or the as is. It's difficult to understand, and by looking at the data, which one is right, which one's wrong, or maybe it's something in between. But so what's right? So we have to be really careful when we're talking about relative reality and absolute reality. The first one says that both are right, and this one says no, one is either right and the other one wrong, or something in between. There's a gray area. Now in the third scenario, one person believes in God and the other one says there is no God. The raw data is the same, but the interpretation is relative. However, one is right and one is wrong. There is no middle ground. So we have to be careful now to determine between these 3 scenarios that they're both right, or maybe one's right and one's wrong, or something in between, or there's one right and one wrong. Now, in my opinion, of course, the third one is that there is a God, and that there is no leeway there. I can't have any leeway.
I am confident there is a God because no God scenario is not viable. For example, the evidence starting from the beginning. An infinite, eternal, living, intelligent, proactive being, God, which is greater than which nothing can be imagined, versus no God. An infinite and eternal being created matter and energy, versus matter and energy came into existence by itself, which breaks the law of non-contradiction. A proactive, intelligent being created chemicals. Chemicals evolved over billions of years through reactive nature. What the question really is that we should be asking is, where did nature come from? What made and nature intelligent? How did nature come into being? So it obviously didn't always exist. Um, so then there's the proactive, intelligent being created RNA and DNA. RNA and DNA evolved over billions of years through reactive nature. Nature reacts, it's not proactive, it's not intelligent. Proactive, intelligent being created irreducibly complex machines. Irreducibly complex machines evolved over billions of years through reactive nature. I think we showed that's just not possible. It just kind of had to be as is. That gives some credence to this as is, or at least that God had to be involved and put his finger on the scales at that particular time. Now there was one. Let me just pause for 1 second. There is some people would say that would be God of the gaps. Those people that try to say this, that want to stay with God but want to stay with evolution, and things like the Cambrian explosion and irreducibly complex machines, that's where God would have intervened. So God's the God of the gaps type of thinking. Now there was one professor I heard at the Reformed Theological Seminary who said something about, his name is Richard Pratt, if you want to look him up, from the third millennium. He stated something like intervening historical contingency. So just look that up and do some exploration in that area. So then you have proactive living being created a finely tuned universe for living things. Living things evolved over billions of years through reactive nature, but the balance, the fine tuning, is just incredible. A proactive, intelligent being created intelligent beings. Intelligent beings evolved over billions of years through reactive nature. That has not really been proven. How can intelligence, to me, can only be created by intelligence? How can something that's not intelligent create something that is intelligent? That just breaks down, in my opinion. And an intelligent being created moral absolutes. Relative moral absolutes evolved over billions of years through reactive nature. If everything's relative as far as morality, we're in trouble. We're just going to go back and forth. We'll never know. There has to be some absolutes, and we've shown that there has to be absolutes in the real world. There's an underlying value. The data is the raw value, is the absolute. Well, also in the moral aspect and understanding of things, I believe personally that there has to be absolutes. So after looking at all these, I think that the viable way of believing is the belief in God, and no God is just not viable. There's too many points that are missing.
Well, some people might say, well, John, what about all possible worlds, multiverse understanding of things, which I'll talk to you about then in my next class. But in all possible worlds, in all possible universes, let's suppose it could be a God. And I would say no, by definition, that does not work, because I can think of a God that's greater than which nothing can be imagined, which means that if there's a God that is not in all universes, I can think of a God that's greater than that. So some people say, here's a definition. There's this thing going around on the internet, and you can find it. It talks about a bachelor. A bachelor is an unmarried man. A bachelor is an unmarried man in all universes, because if he's married in a different universe, then he would no longer be a bachelor. So by definition, a bachelor is an unmarried man in all universes. It's the same with God. It's predicated by the definition of God, in particular, infinite, eternal, and that which nothing greater can be imagined. If you take that understanding of God, my understanding of God, then God is in all universes. So you can eliminate that thinking.
Take advantage of the internet. There's a tremendous amount of information there. Here are just a few points that you might want to look up for further study.
I'd like to end this class with a parable, if you will. At the end of time, God looked back across time and saw that humans were somewhat selfish and self-centered, and viewing the world through a somewhat narrow perspective, looked out across the land and declared that the earth was flat. And all the people of the earth believed it, only to find out that it's not. Then the humans looked up to the heavens and declared, well, surely the earth is the center of our solar system, and all the people of the earth believed it, only to find out that it's not. Then one day the philosopher, the theologian, the scientist, the mathematician, and all the major intellect of the world, they sat down and they thought. And finally the philosopher stood up and said, it seems to me that if all things begin with humans, then there is no need for God. Therefore there is no God. And when we die, that's it. And all the people of the earth believed it, only to find out that it's not. The point of the parable is that all the people of the world can say that there is no God does not mean there is no God. Now the point of this class was not to prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that God exists. It was to put some doubt in your mind for those of you who doubt that God exists. I was just trying to show you that this is a viable way of thinking. It is difficult. It goes beyond my ability to totally comprehend. But there's enough evidence, logic, and physical evidence to believe that there is a God that does exist. You have the data. Hopefully I have been able to convince you that there is indeed, that God in Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, is a viable way of thinking. And until then, and now you know more of the story. Stay tuned. This is John McCamick with Truth University. Good day.